Talk to them, Flock. Talk to them, my dog.
K-Flock's case has taken a big turn because his own gang member is now testifying against him. Reports say that in 2020, Flock used a firearm to protect a friend who was attacked. But now, that same friend, Brockington, who is known in the streets as Douche, is giving evidence against him. Douche was arrested for selling on the streets, and to save himself, he made a deal with the prosecutors. He agreed to testify against Flock in exchange for a lighter sentence. But even with this happening, Flock seems to be handling his time in jail without any problems. In court, the prosecutors questioned Douche about the name KK and asked if it referred to K-Flock. Douche confirmed that it did. They then asked if Flock had plans to take revenge on the person who attacked Douche, and he said yes. When asked if he had seen Flock with a firearm, Douche again said yes. He explained that their rivals had been circling the block before the incident, which created a lot of tension. This testimony directly connects to the case that put K-Flock behind bars. On December 23, 2021, K-Flock was charged with the passing of Oscar Hernandez. That day, security cameras captured him walking through the city with his sister. He was wearing a blue designer coat, a ski mask, and designer jeans. Just before this, Flock had been on Instagram Live, arguing with his rivals. Shortly after, he put his phone away and continued walking. As Flock passed a barbershop, Oscar Hernandez, who was inside, saw him and immediately recognized him. He quickly ran out and confronted Flock, asking, "What are you looking at?" Their history of tension boiled over, and they started shouting at each other in the street. Flock did not want to fight, especially with his sister beside him, so he tried to walk away. But Oscar was not ready to let it go. He followed Flock for a few moments, then hesitated, almost going back inside the barbershop. However, against his better judgment, he decided to continue the argument. As Oscar walked after Flock, he reached into his jacket pocket. Seeing this, Flock reacted immediately. He pulled out a firearm from his own jacket and fired at Oscar multiple times. Oscar tried to run back inside the barbershop, but he collapsed on the sidewalk. Once Flock stopped firing, he quickly left the scene, leaving Oscar lying on the ground. Witnesses rushed to help and called 911. Paramedics arrived and took Oscar to a nearby hospital, but sadly, he did not survive. At the scene, police found shell casings and Oscar's slippers left on the sidewalk. For the first 24 hours, it seemed like Flock had gotten away. The NYPD collected security footage, but had no immediate leads because the suspect was wearing a mask. With no clear identity, law enforcement turned to the public for help. They released a photo of the masked suspect and asked for tips. Unfortunately for Flock, his fame worked against him. Fans quickly pieced together clues. Some noticed that the designer coat in the security footage matched a jacket Flock had worn in pictures. Others pointed out that during his Instagram Live, Flock had been wearing the same outfit as in the footage. It did not take long for people to tip off the police. The NYPD acted fast, and within hours, they issued an arrest warrant for Flock. Realizing that his time was running out, Flock made a quick decision. He reached out to one of the best defense lawyers available and made arrangements to turn himself in. The next day, Flock and his lawyer walked into the NYPD's 30th precinct together. His lawyer released a statement saying, "Yesterday, I accompanied Kevin as he self-surrendered to detectives in the 30th precinct. As soon as we learned he was wanted, we arranged for his surrender. We are now reviewing the case and preparing his defense." As the case developed, the situation became more serious. Shortly after his arrest, the NYPD stated that they believed this was part of a long-standing feud between street teams. They confirmed that Flock was heavily associated with the Bronx-based Third Side crew and had been involved in street activities for years. Due to his status, he had influence in the streets and was often targeted by rival groups. This history damaged his reputation in the music industry, and many turned against him. Now, with Douche testifying against him, things have become even worse. The prosecutors believe his testimony strengthens their case, while Flock's legal team continues to fight for him. His lawyers argue that he acted in self-defense and had no choice but to protect himself when he saw Oscar reaching into his pocket. With the trial ongoing, fans and supporters are waiting to see what happens next. Will Flock be able to prove his case, or will the testimony of his former ally seal his fate? Before this, Flock was on Instagram Live, arguing with his rivals before putting his phone away. As he walked past a barbershop, Oscar Hernandez saw him from inside and quickly ran out. He stopped Flock and asked him what he was looking at. There was already history between them, so they started shouting at each other. Flock did not want to put his sister in danger, so he kept walking. But Oscar kept following him. For a moment, Oscar thought about going back inside, but then he decided to continue the argument. A few seconds later, he put his hand inside his jacket. Flock saw this and reacted fast. He took out his firearm from his jacket and fired at Oscar, hitting him multiple times. Oscar tried to run back to the barbershop, but he collapsed on the sidewalk. After the shooting, Flock ran away while people around called 911. Oscar was rushed to a nearby hospital, but he did not survive. The only things left at the scene were shell casings and Oscar's slides. For the first 24 hours, it seemed like Flock got away with it. The NYPD collected security footage, but they could not tell who the masked person was. They had no leads, so they asked the public for help by posting a picture from the footage. But Flock was too famous, and too many people were watching him. Fans quickly recognized the designer coat he was wearing. They also noticed that on his Instagram Live earlier that day, he had on the same outfit. People started sending tips to the police, and soon, the NYPD had enough proof to issue a warrant for his arrest. Flock knew his time was almost up, so he made one last move. He hired one of the best lawyers in the world. The next day, he and his lawyer walked into the NYPD's 30th precinct together. His legal team quickly released a statement, saying that he turned himself in. His lawyer said they were going to fight the case. Now, with access to all the evidence, Flock's defense team is working hard to prove his innocence.
They want you. I knew they wanted him bad when they waited for that law to get passed. So it'd be 8-4.
Oh, right.
Shortly after the NYPD released their statement, they said they believed the incident happened because of a long-running conflict between street teams. They also pointed out that K-Flock had a strong connection to the Bronx Third Side team. His name had been tied to street crimes in the years leading up to this, and because of his status in the streets, he had a lot of influence. But with that influence came a target on his back. Whenever his rivals struck back, he was often in their sights. This situation damaged his reputation in the music industry, and even his best friend, B. Lovey, spoke about it. He mentioned how some fans were upset with both him and DJ Academics after Flock got locked up. He said people were accusing them of speaking too soon about the case, acting as if Flock's career was already over. Others in the hip-hop world also reacted. Bobby Shmurda shared his thoughts, calling the situation crazy. He said Flock was the next big artist coming out of New York, and he hoped for the best for him and his family. He spoke about how much potential Flock had and how it would be a sad story if this was how it all ended. He encouraged people to stay positive. Meanwhile, Flock's legal team was working on a self-defense argument. But just when things could not get any worse, the news dropped. K-Flock was indicted by a federal grand jury on multiple racketeering charges, also known as a RICO case. People in hip-hop understood how serious this was. One comment said, K-Flock just caught a RICO, it is over. DJ Academics also shared the news, saying the feds had just unsealed the indictment, and if Flock did not beat the charges or take a plea, he was facing a life sentence. On top of that, he still had state charges keeping him locked up. Many people compared K-Flock's situation to that of YNW Melly. Boozy spoke about it, saying that when the feds decide to go after someone, they will do whatever it takes to keep them locked up. He mentioned how they waited for a specific law to pass before bringing Melly to trial, making it clear that the case had been built over a long period. Boozy believed the same thing was happening to Flock. He pointed out that the government had likely been working on this case for years, gathering evidence and waiting for the right time to strike. This situation has led many to believe that the feds are specifically targeting rappers. It is no secret that law enforcement has been watching hip-hop artists closely, especially those who have been linked to street activities. The use of RICO charges against rappers has become more common, with authorities aiming to dismantle entire street organizations by using their own lyrics and social media activity against them. For Flock, things became even worse when a federal grand jury indicted him on multiple racketeering conspiracy charges, also known as RICO charges. This news sent shockwaves through the hip-hop community because once the feds get involved, the chances of beating the case become much lower. DJ Academics reacted to the news by saying, "Flock just caught a RICO, it is over." He pointed out that if Flock could not beat the charges or cooperate with authorities, he could be facing life in prison. He also reminded fans that Flock was still facing state charges that had already kept him behind bars. Flock's legal team, however, has not backed down. His lawyers continue to push the argument that his actions were in self-defense. They argue that on the day of the incident, he tried to walk away from the confrontation, but when he noticed Oscar Hernandez reaching into his pocket, he feared for his safety and reacted. They insist that Flock was not the aggressor, but was simply protecting himself and his sister. His lawyer even released a statement saying, "We are not surprised by these federal charges, as we have been fighting Kevin's state charges for over a year now." The fact that the case is now being used as a basis for a penalty charge is extraordinary. On video, it is crystal clear that Kevin was trying to walk away before he was forced to defend himself. As Flock remains behind bars, his supporters continue to rally behind him. Many believe he is being unfairly targeted because of his status as a rapper. Some argue that if he were not famous, his case might not have received this level of attention from federal authorities. Others point out that the justice system has a long history of using RICO laws to take down influential figures in certain communities, and this could be another example of that.
Investigation aspect of this, Lamont Freeman was allowed to be a 13-year-old for 27 minutes before gang.
Despite the serious charges against him, Flock remains hopeful. His legal team believes they have a strong case, and his supporters are standing by him. Whether he will be able to beat the charges remains to be seen, but one thing is clear, his case has become one of the most talked about legal battles in the hip-hop world. The outcome of his trial could set a major precedent for how the justice system treats rappers in the future. Flock's lawyer responded to the federal indictment, saying they were not surprised. He pointed out that they had been fighting the state charges for over a year, and since it was clearly a self-defense case, the original charge was not very strong. He found it shocking that this same case was now being used to bring federal charges. The lawyer also brought up the surveillance footage, saying it clearly showed Flock trying to walk away before the situation escalated. He argued that Flock only acted in self-defense when the other person reached for something in their pocket. Flock's main concern in that moment was protecting himself and his sister. Despite all the legal trouble, there was one small bit of good news for Flock. Court reporters announced that the first day of his trial had officially ended, marking the beginning of his fight to clear his name. During the trial, many people noticed that the prosecutors were not ready. They were struggling with their words, could not answer some of the judge's questions, and did not give enough proof to challenge Flock's lawyer. At the end of the trial day, Flock looked emotional. It made sense because it was his first day in court. But his lawyers stayed calm and whispered to him that they were going to win. Flock's legal team also shared a message from him in jail. He said, "I am good, man. I just want to see the guys. I will be back real soon. Shout out to my fans and supporters. I love all of you. See you soon." But Flock is not the only rapper who is being targeted. Many rappers are now facing legal trouble. Just last week, Atlanta police mentioned Lil Baby in an investigation. One case shocked the city. A young boy named Lamont Freeman was only 13 years old when he lost his life because of gang violence. Police said some gang members in Atlanta planned this act. They blamed a rapper for going into a rival gang's area to shoot a music video, even though he knew it would cause problems. They said this act led to the deaths of 2 children. Lamont Freeman was a bright and hopeful young boy with dreams of growing up and making a difference. However, his life was taken too soon due to the ongoing street wars in Atlanta. On that tragic day, authorities say he was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. The police later revealed that a group of gang members had been involved in the planning of a violent act that ultimately resulted in his passing. What made this situation even more tragic was that another child also lost their life in the same incident. The community was devastated, and questions arose about how such a terrible event could have happened. Investigators soon discovered that a well-known rapper had entered a rival gang's territory to film a music video. They believed this act of disrespect heightened tensions and led to the deadly retaliation that took the lives of 2 innocent children. Authorities were quick to hold those responsible accountable, calling the situation a cowardly act that could have been avoided. Law enforcement officials expressed their frustration, stating that adults in the community should have taken responsibility instead of allowing violence to escalate to the point where children paid the ultimate price. The case sparked outrage in Atlanta and beyond. Many people blamed the gang culture that had taken over parts of the city. Others pointed fingers at the music industry, arguing that certain artists glorified violence and gang activities in their lyrics. Debates broke out over whether rappers should be held accountable for the influence they had on the streets. Some believed that these artists were simply reflecting the reality of their environment, while others felt that they were fueling the violence by promoting dangerous lifestyles. As the investigation continued, police vowed to crack down on gang activity in the city. They also sent a strong warning to others involved in gang-related crimes, making it clear that law enforcement was watching. Meanwhile, the families of the victims were left to mourn their losses, hoping for justice and an end to the cycle of violence that had taken so many young lives. One police officer spoke out and said, "You know who you are. We will not stop working until you and the people with you are held responsible." Even Young and Ace was named by the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. They said they have been watching him and his group for a long time. One officer said, "We are always keeping an eye on them. He cannot move around Jacksonville without us knowing, and that is for the safety of our community." With all these cases happening, many people believe that rappers are being taken down on purpose. Some are asking if this is all just random, or if the police are making an example out of hip-hop artists.